On Tuesday night in Wichita, a Bernie-backing Democrat, James Thompson, came within about 6.5 points of what would have been an earthquake of an upset against State Treasurer Ron Estes, a Republican who nobody was paying attention to up until Wednesday of last week, when news started to trickle out of Kansas that national Republicans were throwing more than $100,000 into this race. Now, the Republican Party does not just throw around $100,000 or $200,000 for no reason. Immediately, people knew what was going on. They had a poll that showed that this race was on the edge. The Kansas City Star has since reported that the poll they had showed that Thompson was only down by 1 point. And so they did what Kansas Republicans do. They immediately filmed a brutal abortion ad, threw it up on TV. Then they went and found people who appeal to the evangelical community, Vice President Mike Pence. They flew Ted Cruz into the district. And then they went all the way to Trump and had Trump tape robocalls that circulated throughout the district. They also pushed some live phone calls in. Democrats who saw this same thing unfolding had a rather different reaction. The party wound up staying out of the race until Monday, when they decided to jump in and do some phone calls at the last minute. But Daily Kos, 3 or 4 million subscribers to their email list and the millions who visit their site, they kicked into gear as soon as they heard Republicans went in. I talked to David Neer, the political director of Daily Kos, and he said that before they started fundraising, they reached out to the Thompson campaign and said, look, if we raise money for you, look, it's Thursday already. The election's on Tuesday. Is there anything you can actually do with it? And they said, yes, we're already up on the air. We already have online ads. We can just expand those ads. We can put money into our Get Out the Vote operation, and we can put money into our voter protection unit, which is a team of lawyers that goes around to precincts making sure that there aren't voting irregularities. Extremely important in a state where the Secretary of State is Chris Kobach, who is one of the architects of the kind of Republican voter suppression effort. And so the moves by the Republican National Party did seem to shore things up. They stopped some of the bleeding. By the end of the night, it was a 6 or 7 point loss for Democrats. This is a race, though, that Trump just a few months ago won by 27 points in the district. So that means if you're a Republican who won a race in November by less than 20 points, you're now vulnerable. Now, there's been a lot of criticism of the D-Trip and the DNC for not getting more involved, and I want to talk about that a little bit later, but happy to go to some of your questions about this race. I know a lot of people have them because we only first started hearing about this Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, just about everybody has a comment that is about the DCC being negligent, says Diana. Russell Beach, how are the Dems going to win like this? Charles Patrick is blaming Bernie Sanders for being MIA again, just like he was with Canova in Florida. A couple more people mad at Bernie.
So Bernie does not come through this looking great. I will say that. So I actually interviewed him on Friday. I said, are you doing anything for the Kansas special election? And he said, well, I already went to Kansas. And indeed, a few months ago, he did go to a kind of a Democratic Party event in Kansas. It was not in this district, but he had gone to Kansas. Our Revolution, his organization that evolved from the Sanders campaign, endorsed Thompson early, to their credit, but they didn't actually do anything. They raised about $900 for him total, which, and maybe a few hundred, this was over the weekend, they may have raised more on Monday, so there might not be a precise total, but that means that they probably did a tweet or a Facebook status update or something. If they'd have gone out to their full list with endorsement and an ask for him, they would have raised more money. This is a guy who caucused for Bernie Sanders in Kansas, and he ran as kind of an unapologetic progressive, a pro-choice Bernie-crat in Wichita, Kansas, taking it to Ron Estes, tying him to Sam Brownback, saying that this is a referendum on the kind of the Kansas experiment. And he beat, actually, an establishment Democrat in the primary to run that race. So, the Sanders, the kind of Our Revolution decision not to play in this race is a confusing one, and one that I think they'll have to explain in the next few days. Now, Sanders supporters generally did get involved. I interviewed Marcos Molitsis earlier today, actually, and they raised about $160,000 in just a matter of a couple days for Thompson, and he says that he assumes that the overwhelming number of people who gave through Daily Kos were actually Bernie supporters. So it's not as if Bernie supporters were gone. It was just the organized Bernie infrastructure that was MIA. Now, to me, that's a completely separate question from the D-Trip and a completely separate question from the DNC. I think you have to kind of analytically separate these questions. The pattern of argument that you see too often on Twitter and online is it's what they call whataboutism. Say, well, the D-Trip didn't do anything. Well, what about our revolution? They didn't do anything. Now, one thing does not answer the other. So let's take the issues separately. So the D-Trip, let me give you their explanation for why they don't get in races like this. And it comes down to this phenomenon that they call nationalizing a race. So if a district is heavily Democratic, you want to nationalize the race. You want people in the district to see that it is a team blue versus team red, Democrat versus Republican, because then people will go to their tribal corners and they will vote for the Democrat, and the Republicans will vote for the Republican. And if you have more Democrats in the district, then you're going to win that one. Now, if you're in a district that you typically lose by 30 points because there are so many Republicans, their theory is you don't want to, quote, nationalize that race, because then everything becomes tribal. The Republicans, who might be asleep at the switch, wake up. They turn out, and if they turn out at the numbers that they have in the district, then they win. And so there's this theory that they can somehow come in under the radar and allow the two guys, Estes versus Thompson, to compete as if one's not a D and one's not an R. So that's the theory, and there are people who find that theory completely believable. I think it has, it makes a little bit of sense, but I don't think it. I don't know what data there is to back this up, but this is something I'm still following up on. I think if you're going to have a theory like this that drives your strategy in races like this, you've got to have some data that backs it up. I don't know if that exists. Thompson did a tremendous job of making the race about Sam Brownback. His popularity is in the mid-20s. He just recently vetoed a Medicaid expansion that the Republican legislature almost overrode. They were a vote or two short. Extremely unpopular guy, so Thompson managed to kind of localize it and say this is actually a referendum on Brownback. And so the DCCC would say, well, that's a much better frame than making it even a referendum on Trump in a county where Trump is probably still above water when it comes to popularity. But all that assumes that you can that you can get away from nationalizing a race when we live in such polarized national times. Separately, once the National Republican Party came in there, this whole conversation about whether or not the race is going to be nationalized is over. It's now a national race. Everybody is paying attention, and the fact that the D-Trip didn't get involved even then, they had a chance Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Finally on Monday they started making some calls. They pumped like 25,000 get out the vote calls into the district. Finally Monday they get involved. So the question would then be, well, what was holding them back the last 5 days or so, which would suggest that the nationalization theory is actually just an explanation for something that they wanted to do for other reasons.
So there's a lot of back and forth, blame Bernie, don't
Right.
blame Bernie. He does have a full-time job, that kind of stuff. And then there's Robert Walker saying, until we stand up and act as one, we will each continue to pay the price
Right.
individually.
Right, and yeah, Bernie does have a full-time job, but Our Revolution's full-time job is to do political campaign work and issue advocacy and broad progressive advocacy. So, yeah, yes and no. Was his name Robert? On Robert's point, yeah, absolutely. In a lot of countries, and let's separate this from this country. In a lot of countries where there's been a fascist takeover, the left, the broad left, from Christian Democrats all the way to the Communist Party, will form what they usually call a popular front or a national front or something like that, in which they say, look, if we don't hang together, we're all going to hang separately. Let's resolve our own differences after we have beaten back what is an existential threat to all of us. And so I think Robert's point is kind of along those lines, that everybody needs to just join together here. And in some ways, Daily Kos this time was a model for that. In some ways they were not. But in other words, Daily Kos, which didn't take a position during the primary, alienated a lot of Bernie people along the way, jumped in with 2 feet into this race to back a Bernie-crat. Now, afterwards, they were, they got into a bunch of online fights with Bernie people. So, nobody's a pure unifier in this picture. But what they did do is they got in, and they turned kind of words into action. Instead of complaining, they went forward. And the one thing I would say is that for everybody who's blaming the D-Trip and the DNC, these are people who rely heavily on corporate money and on money from the 1%. And so, that isn't necessarily the money that you want funding a political revolution. You're never going to get a political revolution that's funded by corporate money and high dollar donors. And so, yes, it's a level of incompetence that the DNC or DCCC didn't get involved. But why do you necessarily want them involved? If you need to raise a couple $100,000, that can be done with the entire progressive community, Democratic Socialist community, liberal community, Green community, throwing in $5 or $10 to Thompson. The way they've raised $8 to $9 million for Jonathan Ossoff down in Georgia, they could have done the same for Thompson. They could do the same in South Carolina, that upcoming race, and the race in Montana. So in one sense, hey, DNC, D-Trip, you don't want to play? Okay.
Really quickly, can you talk about the other 3 special elections and where they stand?
So we have April 18th. I'll be there for the Huffington Post in Georgia. If Jon Ossoff wins 50+1% of the vote, they will win that district. It used to be held by Tom Price. Before that, it was held for years by one Newt Gingrich. If he doesn't, it goes to a runoff in June. Next in May, you have Rob Quist, kind of a populist bluegrass legend in the state, running against Greg Gianforte, who tried to buy the governor's mansion in November, failed. Now he's trying to buy a House seat. He's kind of a tech billionaire who made his fortune creating software that allows companies or helps companies outsource jobs. It's kind of a you can't make this up kind of Republican candidate. It's going to be, I think it's going to be a very close race again. And I think particularly after Georgia on Tuesday, people are going to start focusing on it, and you're going to see Rob Quist raising an extraordinary sum of money. Right now, people aren't paying a lot of attention to him. You also have an interesting race shaping up in South Carolina. You would think that Mick Mulvaney's seat, he went on to become OMB director, wouldn't be up for grabs. But if a race in Kansas that was 27 points in November winds up as 7 points last night, then this race, which was closer to 15 or so, actually becomes a ball game. You have 2 interesting Democrats running. One is a 26-year-old woman of color who was, I believe, a Bernie supporter. And the second is a 50-something accountant who either did accounting work as on contract or actually worked for Goldman Sachs. So this is and he's running as a Democrat. Apparently, he's has a lot of liberal social views and is an accountant, who made a lot of money in the financial services industry. Grew up in the district. Archie something, I can't remember his last name.